Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So like I always do every year, I always watch the Davos meetings, the desperators of Davos, like I call them all the time. Trump gave a great speech there, and I think it's a sign of things to come. But it's also important because the trend over the last 15, 20 years at that event, there's always business leaders and political figures to get together and they talk about how to improve the world from their perspective. And what you usually get from administrative state types of people is this belief that the more rules and regulations they write, the better off it's going to be. And you see that cascading down to your human resource departments in your local wherever you work. You see that all these unwarranted rules have come down and impose themselves in your life, and now you look everywhere and you got too many rules, slowing everything down economically, through innovation. There's just way too many rules that hold back society because these pinheads come up with all this dumb stuff and they think that they made it better when they've actually made it a lot worse. And unchecked over a period of time, all those rules and regulations have really harmed our society in ways that just made people brain dead and numb to it. And now I think after COVID, and we learned that the people making up all these rules were pretty stupid, and they went so far to do the mask mandates and the social distancing and all the crazy stuff that they talk about at Davos. The theme this year at this 2025 Davos meeting was, well, the world doesn't like us, and there's a threat. They're going to try and get rid of all these rules. And you heard that Trump, now he's back in the White House, has going back to his policy of for every one rule you want to write, you got to get rid of 10. And the theme there is, just like in writing something or video, making some movie presentation, you go out and film a bunch of footage, but you gotta edit the thing down. You got to cut it down to something that makes sense. I've never turned in a manuscript for a book and then had it all go through the first time. Usually an editor will go through and take your 220 word manuscript and say, you got to get it down to 68,000 words, 228,000 words to 68. You gotta thin things down. And same thing with regulations. In a regulatory environment, especially in business, every rule you write, every regulation you're dealing with, you can't just react to circumstances of like audit controls and you just keep making up new rules to get through the audit or have a corrective action for the audit. And then pretty soon you got this whole book of rules that nobody's looking at or paying attention to because there's just too much of it. You got to find a way to narrow that down. And so you owe it to yourself and to the industry you're working for to find a way to do the same thing, but take it so it's more digestible for common people. You just don't pile it up and say, now it's your responsibility to read this giant book. Have fun. I had an experience one time, the Cincinnati Building Commission down in City Hall in Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati. I was working on a project, and they told me, you got to do this thing. I think it's something I had to get an elevator compliance because they just did this handicap accessibility thing, and the thing I was doing was on the third floor of this building. They told me I had to build a ramp to get up there for handicapped people, and the place already had a ramp. Anyway, they gave me this giant book of revised code, building code, and you go through it and you read this thing, and it's a 3,000 page book. It was a huge book. And you have to go figure out in it how you can get out of doing what it is you want to do. And they won't tell you, even though they know. The building commission people, they just give you the book and say, have fun, hire yourself a good lawyer or a good engineer, and or just throw money at the project, which is what they want you to do. They want you to throw money at the problem because they put all those rules and regulations in there mean money. And that's the way it is for every industry. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're making donuts or tires. When you have too much regulatory burden, you have really two choices. You're going to be in violation somewhere, so you're going to get in trouble, or you're going to throw a lot of money at it. And then, of course, when you throw money at it, you make all these parasites that kind of live off the over-regulation rich. But you don't get any boon to your productivity. You just throw money at a problem, which then takes away the margin. which then takes away your incentive to do it in the first place. So then you have less economic activity. That's why Trump is so adamant about pushing for regulatory reform. I've been telling people for a long, long time, a couple decades now, you watch every year, and the trend is you're going to have more regulations to deal with, so get used to it every year. Next year it's going to be harder. Next year it's going to be harder. Well, at some point in time, you have a diminishing marginal return. And at some point in time, someone's going to come along, crack the code, and say less regulations better. That doesn't mean you make a more dangerous product. It doesn't mean that you are slack-jawed about your approach. But what it does mean is the quality of your regulations need to be better. They need to serve everybody, the consumer, the innovators, the manufacturers, everybody who's involved. It needs to do a better job of accommodating what it is you're trying to make. Instead of just serving the pinheads and the administrative people who just want an easy task, and they want to load up a book and give you a 3,000-page something to go look through, and then you figure out how you can be compliant to it. Now, in the case of the Cincinnati Building Code, I'm a pretty good reader. I would say I have excessive reading comprehension skills. And they never thought in the world that I would find something in that book, probably 500,000, maybe 700,000 words, very large book. They didn't think I was going to read it and figure out how I can get out of it, and I did. I found the one sentence out of all those sentences that got my project out of that mess. And it held up in court, and I went through lawsuits, and I performed as my own attorney in those cases to keep the costs down and all that kind of stuff. And we won on all cases because I found that one sentence. And that's usually the case in all these rules and regulations. But I think the trend now has been, and this is what you saw at Davos, they know that the new way of the world is what they're doing at SpaceX. And when Elon Musk says edit, find out who wrote the regulation, find out why they wrote the regulation, challenge it, because that's the way you do these things. Challenge, challenge, challenge. Never just assume. The regulation might have been good, but chances are you had some comb over, coffee breath loser who was lazy, just trying to get home so he could play his fantasy football league, and he wrote some rule so he could just check off something on an audit. And then that rule then becomes a rule that everybody in government follows, and they walk around with their big books, their big notebooks, and they throw it on your desk and tell everybody who tries to run a business, now you figure it out. You figure out how you can run your business, and let us know. We're not going to tell you. You got to figure it out on your own. That's how they've been operating for a long time, and now the trend is being broken by SpaceX. So as I've been saying for decades now, the trend towards compliance to more rules and regulations is going to go the other way. That doesn't mean that you have a dangerous society or that regulations of some kind aren't needed in some cases, but you don't want a society that is overburdened by regulations not well thought out, hodgepodge together by lazy people in the process, with too much government control, who comes up with 10 rules when it should be just one. Which it goes back to when Trump says, hey, we're going to, every new regulation you propose, you find a way to get rid of 10 of them. And otherwise, don't give me one more regulation that people are going to be strangled by under the pressure of it to comply to. We have to get to a society where you have less of that, not more of it. And that's certainly what Trump promised. That's what they are figuring out at Davos. The trendsetters like SpaceX have moved in a different direction. They actually say if a rule is written out there, find out who wrote it and why, and then challenge it and possibly delete it and replace it with something better. And that kind of continuous improvement is something government is not prepared for. They are not ready for that type of approach to governments and regulation. When I had my experiences, especially the one I mentioned, there's a lot of giggling that went on. And I know in this case, the reason they were mad is I had hired an engineer to work on this project for me, to do all this kind of stuff. And it was a guy, I hired him politically because he was friends with a lot of people that worked at City Hall. And I figured, well, he's got the inside track. I'll put him in charge of these things and let him handle the rules and regulations. And he kept coming back to me with higher and higher bills. Well, Mr. Hoffman, this is what you're going to do. This is going to be $30,000 here, $30,000 there, $20,000 there, and there, and all over the place. And he just kept coming and bringing me all these extra bills. And I told him, I said, no, this is a cost we're keeping down. He said, well, that's not how it works in the world. So I fired him, got rid of him, and I had to do the job myself. And so these guys down at the city hall were mad at me for firing their friend because of course he told them, he's a cheapskate. He doesn't want to spend money. So he fired me. And so then he sued me for all kinds of things, and it got really messy. Meanwhile, I had to go do his job myself. And so I went through that big book and found the thing he couldn't find out to defend me as a client. I did it. And I did the law work too. So, and the lawyers that were involved, I had to do their job because none of them, they all made money off the system. The system of chaos that only they understood and most people don't have, especially when you're trying to do an entrepreneurial effort. You're already on the hook for all the risk. You shouldn't have to get busted up the other way too, where you got to sit down and do all this work 7 or 80 hours a week just on compliance. And so most places just spend money on the compliance. I say, Mr. Lawyer, get me out of this thing. Mr. Engineer, get me out of this thing. Mr. Political Figure, here's a donation, get me out of this thing. And that's how you get what you get in the world, and it's bad. And it all starts with too much regulation. And as I said, the trend of the world is going to be less of that, not more of it. We're going to get to a point where we're going to say we want to get rid of these regulations, and we don't want to hire all these pinhead lawyers. We don't want to hire all these pinheaded, stuffy, negative engineers who just want to make an easy living by telling you got to spend more money, and they don't work in a way to try to find solutions to your problems. They just tell you to spend money to get out of them, and you have to spend the money because there's too much regulatory environment. And we're going to get to a point in our nation, in the United States, we're going to say we don't want that kind of world. We want a much more innovative world where we don't have so much burden on the risk takers out there, because we want them out there doing risk taking and making cool things for us. And we don't want the regulations to stop it. So that trend is happening. It's occurring. And now that Trump's back in office, the Davos people have figured out that people don't like them, and that they've lost their trust to even create regulations in the first place, because with COVID and the way they climbed out over that diving board, they blew it forever. People lost trust in them, and they're never going to get it back. And so now the trend is going to be, like Trump says, if you're going to make a regulation, get rid of 10 of them, get rid of 20 of them, get rid of as many as you can. If you can consolidate them into a much more concise statement that actually protects the product and the people using it, fine. But if you're just making it so you can make money off the expert class and make it so difficult that nobody could possibly understand all the rules, but hire a professional to translate it for them, which was the case that I mentioned. And that's not just the one, that's just one that was kind of excessive. I'm still proud of it after all many years of being able to find the solution in that huge text of book, because there's always a loophole. You just have to have high reading comprehension and ability to get it for yourself to get there. But it ain't easy. And a lot of these pinheads make it deliberately hard because they make money off the difficulty. And we're at a place where people are rejecting that, which couldn't happen soon enough. But the trend of the world, no matter what industry you're in, is less regulation or higher quality regulation, and less mess that everybody can understand, as opposed to making it so difficult that only specialists can understand. The specialists are going to be removed from the process because they violated the trust that they have with the public, and now they're being rejected wholesale. And that's a lot of those people who attend Davos and bust in all those prostitutes to serve their little their nightcaps. They're not high quality people. They're detrimental, horrible people, and they never should have been speaking on our behalf in the first place. And sustaining this regulatory environment that was only going to make them good and ruin the world for the rest of us. Those days are over. And that's the trend of this next decade, next 2 decades, I would say. And companies like SpaceX are going to be the ones who most advance good things on that frontier, but they're not the only ones. That's anybody who's successful in the future is going to have to find a way to get regulation out of their processes as much as possible so that they can spend more time innovating and creating, making product that people want to buy out there. Not to serve some compliance master who's really just a washed up loser trying to kind of do a post-retirement job and get paid a lot of money translating things that are too difficult for common people to understand. That's why we have to get rid of more regulations. That's why regulations are dangerous, and that's why even the ones that are on the books need to be rethought and considered in a more healthy way so that they can serve people better and have the true intent of a good society that has good regulations. Not that all regulations are bad, but you better think them through before you implement them and hold down the innovation of your society and the happiness of the people who are trying to live in it and work in it. Regulations, compliance to those regulations is going to go the other way, and justifiably so, because the people who made them all up abuse their power in ways that can never be forgiven. And I think it's about time. Thank goodness President Trump is back in office and we can have a much better regulatory environment, and the people that have been trying to use regulations to have power over everybody else, like the people at Davos, I wouldn't say they're all losers, but most of them are losers. Unwarranted merit over our lives through regulation is now becoming a thing of the past, and they're quite well aware of it, which is great to see. I'm Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.